You'd assume that owning a Premier League club is one of the best investments in sports. Billions of fans, global broadcast deals, sold-out stadiums every week. It looks like a machine that prints money. It isn't. Most Premier League clubs lose money in most years, and understanding why reveals something strange about how modern sports ownership actually works. Start with the number that should stop you cold. Across the league last season, clubs posted a combined pre-tax loss approaching £1 billion, a sharp deterioration from the season before, when the shortfall was closer to £100 million. Only 8 of the 20 clubs managed to turn an operating profit, down from 13 the year before. This isn't a struggling league. It's the richest football competition on the planet, and it's still bleeding cash almost everywhere you look. So where does the money actually go? The obvious answer is players. But the deeper answer is wages relative to revenue. Across the league, roughly 2/3 of every pound clubs bring in gets paid straight back out in salaries. That ratio has stayed stubbornly high for years, which means even when revenue grows, there's very little left over once the wage bill is settled. And revenue growth itself has slowed. For most of the 2010s, broadcast income, the TV deals that fund the league, grew in double digits year after year. Since around 2018, that growth has crawled to under 2% a year, while other costs kept climbing at a much faster pace. Matchday income, the thing most fans assume is the backbone of a club's finances, makes up a surprisingly small slice of the pie, only about 14% of total revenue league-wide. The stadium looking full on Saturday tells you almost nothing about whether the club is financially healthy. Here's the part that breaks most people's assumptions. Success on the pitch can actually worsen a club's finances. Chasing a top-4 finish or a European trophy means outbidding rivals for transfers and wages, which pushes costs up faster than the extra prize money and broadcast bonus can cover. A club can win more games and lose more money in the same season. The trophy cabinet and the balance sheet are not telling the same story. Which brings in the rule that's supposed to stop this from spiraling. Profitability and Sustainability Rules, or PSR. Clubs are allowed to lose up to £105 million over a rolling 3-year window, or as little as £39 million if they've spent time outside the Premier League recently. That sounds like a hard limit on recklessness. In practice, it's created an entirely different industry, accounting engineering. Clubs facing a PSR squeeze don't necessarily spend less. They restructure how spending appears on paper. The most common trick is player amortization, spreading a transfer fees cost over the length of a long contract instead of booking it all at once. Sign a player for £100 million on an 8-year deal, and the annual hit to your accounts looks like £12.5 million instead of the full fee up front. The cash still leaves the building. The accounting just makes it look smaller. This is where the case study becomes impossible to ignore. When Clearlake Capital took over Chelsea in 2022, the club spent well over £1 billion on transfers in under 2 years, an amount that dwarfed every previous transfer window in English football history. To make room under PSR, Chelsea signed players to contracts stretching 7 or 8 years, spreading the amortized cost thin enough to stay technically compliant, even as actual spending soared. Regulators eventually clamped down, capping how long amortization periods could run. Then came the accounting move that raised even more eyebrows. Chelsea sold 2 hotels it owned to a sister company under the same ownership group, and separately sold its women's team to another entity within its own ownership structure for £200 million, a transaction that booked as pure profit on the men's team's accounts, even though the money never left the wider ownership umbrella. It wasn't illegal. It exploited a legitimate gap. PSR looks at the club's books, not at where the buyer's money ultimately comes from when the buyer is a related party. That's the mechanism in full view. A club can look financially compliant on paper while its actual spending behavior looks nothing like sustainability. And this is exactly why the Premier League has decided the old system doesn't work anymore. Follow the chain reaction to its logical end. Aggressive spending creates PSR pressure. PSR pressure forces clubs to sell academy graduates or key players before June 30th deadlines, sometimes at a discount, just to book profit in time. Those sales weaken the squad. A weaker squad risks results.
Worse results mean lower broadcast bonuses and prize money, which tightens the financial squeeze even further the following season.
It's a loop that can turn a club that overspent for one ambitious window into a club selling its best players every summer just to stay legal. The league's answer, arriving for the 2026-27 season, is a different framework entirely. Instead of policing losses after the fact, the new squad cost ratio rule caps how much of a club's football revenue, including profit or loss on player sales, can go toward squad costs, at 85%. Crucially, an owner simply injecting cash no longer expands what a club is allowed to spend, because owner money isn't treated as revenue. It's a direct response to the amortization and related party workarounds, closing the loophole that lets spending outpace real earning power. So what does actually owning one of these clubs look like across outcomes? In the best case, you own a top 6 club with a global commercial brand, growing merchandise and sponsorship revenue, and enough on-pitch success to keep broadcast bonuses high profitable, but rarely by a wide margin, and usually because of a well-timed player sale. In the realistic middle case, you're funding annual losses out of pocket, treating the club less as a business and more as a very expensive hobby with occasional glimpses of return. In the worst case, you're Everton in the early 2020s, 5 consecutive years of losses totaling more than £430 million, an ownership dispute, a PSR charge, and a forced sale, all while the stadium stays full every week. Full stands and financial collapse can coexist in the same building at the same time.